Hello and welcome to On the Horizon. This is a live presentation series from Ker Downey. Today's webinar is in partnership with Peru, Peru's tourism board. As the leading tour operator of the world, we wanted to create a resource for you to come and get your questions answered to learn about the next place on your bucket list. I'm your host, Sarah Kramer, with my co-host, Tiffany Dunn. We are here today with our destination specialist for South America, Trista Gage. Trista has traveled all over South America, and she first traveled to Peru in 1997, which ended up being a year-long trip. She loves the mountains, she loves the landscape, she's drawn to the fascinating ruins, the people, the amazing textiles, and all that Peru has to offer. So I'm excited to have Trista here today. Trista, how are you doing?
Good, Sarah. I'm glad to be here and share my excitement and love of Peru.
Well, before we get started, tell us a little bit about why you're so drawn to Peru.
Yeah, so I was born in Vermont. I live in Colorado. I'm always drawn to mountainous areas, mountainous countries. I've worked in travel for over 20 years, and one of my passions has always been South America. And it really did all start in Peru, where I landed with $800 in my pocket in a return trip home. And I was volunteering in the Pueblos Joveneses, which are the slum areas around Lima, back when Lima was a much more sprawling and sometimes dangerous area. I spent time in mountain communities, like the more remote Huancayo. And this community was very isolated because of the Sendero Luminoso, the Shining Path Terrace, and we're very raw still as a community and hadn't seen a lot of tourists. So it was really fun to kind of be in this like untouched communities and learn Spanish. So I spent a lot of time in Peru traveling around South America and always seem to come back to Peru as one of my favorite places.
Can you tell us, I think people know maybe where Machu Picchu is, maybe where Lima is, but can you go through all the different regions of Peru to give us a little bit better idea of what we're about to listen to?
Sure. So Peru is the third largest country in South America. It does cover quite a big expanse and range of diversity in terms of ecosystems. You have the coastline, which is about 1,500 miles, and that is mostly dry, arid desert. You see a lot of sand dunes. The north has some wonderful beaches, but really lesser known areas. You've got the pre-Incan cultures, the Mochi cultures, in the Chiclayo, Trujillo region with the village of the Chan Chan. And then further south, you get the Nazca Lines in some of the wine producing regions. Then you have the middle, the Andes Mountains bisect Peru, and that's the highlands region. That's where a lot of people's bucket list visits are going to focus, the Cusco, Sacred Valley, Machu Picchu, even down to Lake Titicaca. And then you have the Amazon. And the Amazon is actually had a massive portion of Peru. 20% of the whole Amazon basin is in Peru, and you have both the northern section, which is actually the source of the Amazon. As you can see on the map, the gateway is Iquitos, and this is where you find a lot more of the boat-based explorations. And then you also, from Cusco, you can actually do a shorter flight into Puerto Maldonado, and that encompasses the southern Amazon basin. And this is actually one of the richest biodiversity concentrations because you have the Amazon that is nestled right up against the Andes. There's points where you can stand and really look down, 12,000 feet onto the Amazon basin. And you get a lot of microclimates, and that lends to this rich diversity of both plant and bird life and wildlife. And here you have a lot more of the traditional Amazon lodges built in more of a traditional style, a little bit more rustic, but really lends itself to some great exploration by canoe and by foot into this wonderful Amazon region.
Yeah, I know Lima is often thought of as like the stepping off point for the rest of Peru. And as a foodie myself, I've read so much about the restaurants in Lima, and just the, culinary scene that's been up and coming in Lima. So is that a good place to stay if you love food and great restaurants like me?
Yeah, I mean, I think because the foodie and the culture has really exploded in Peru, you'll get a taste of this cuisine throughout. There's a lot of fusion, but for sure, three of the top restaurants in all of South America, even the world, are in Lima. So if and Gaston Acurio was probably the chef that put Peru on the map, and his original restaurant Astrid and Gaston is still in Lima. You have Central by Virgilio Martinez, but he also has, another restaurant endeavor in the Sacred Valley and works with some of the properties to develop menus. So you'll see that, no matter which hotel or property you go to, you get this great range of foodie experiences. And part of that is because of the diversity of the different landscapes in Peru. On the coast, you've got all the seafood. So you've got the ceviche, the highlands brings you the potatoes and quinoa, the potatoes, there's something like 3,000 varieties of potatoes. So, there's a lot of different, you'll see things that you've never seen before. And then the Amazon, you get all this really fresh and exotic fruits, vegetables. So all of this, lends itself to that diversity and to the enjoyment of whether you're eating street food in Lima or at one of the more high-end restaurants, you're going to get this exposure to this really unique food.
Well, so let's talk a little bit about Peru's secrets. So we had mentioned, there are the bucket list places like Machu Picchu, Lima, maybe for the food scene if you're a foodie and things like that. But what are some of the more exclusive places that you perhaps wouldn't know about if you were just doing a basic search online for travel in Peru? So maybe some regions that are a little bit more exclusive and not so well known.
Well, I should probably start by, I think explaining the diversity of experiences itself. So, I think that one thing that we love to do is just find out what people's interests are, because depending if you are a foodie or if you're really into history and culture, or if you're looking for something more adrenaline activities or wildlife and nature, spirituality, we can't, or music. I think I said, I've told people the first time I went to Peru, I thought that all the local musicians were doing covers of Simon and Garfunkel. And then I realized that actually it was Simon and Garfunkel that had taken El Condor Pasa with the Zampoña and infused it into their song. So there's lots of festivals and celebrations at different times. So the starting point is knowing what people's interests are so that we can really enhance that. And then, even in the really common places that people visit, like the Sacred Valley or Lima or Cusco, just by spending a little bit more time there, then you can really get off the track that most people do because they're rushing to check things off a list. So for instance, in Lima, you might want to do a food tour with our expert Marisol. So she'll bring you into the local markets and you'll pick out some food, and she'll have you trying all sorts of fruits, and then you will prepare a meal and get a little bit more of a in-depth exposure to how some of this food is made. You eat it at a restaurant, usually La Picanteria, which is a great restaurant with lots of seafood. Or you might do a street art tour in Callao, which is a port for Lima. And it was really, like most port areas, had been a little bit run down and exposed to more crime. And some of the local communities have really taken it to revitalize it and provide art space for up and coming artists. So it's inexpensive, and they have this just wonderful philosophy of like create, uplift, and transform. So that's something you can do in Lima. Or for instance, in, you can go down the coast. There's a new property called Hacienda La Caravedo, and it's been there for a long time because it's on the grounds of it's part of the oldest distillery in the Americas. They make pisco, which is Peru is famous for, and now they have these private the accommodations, and each bungalow is a 3-bedroom bath property. So you can have this really great private experience. They have the Peruvian paso horses on property, and then you can access whether a pisco and wine experience, or if you want the Paracas area, or even Nazca. So it's a great way to kind of get away from the more normal route. And in the Sacred Valley, you can, I mean, there's so many day hikes you can do in the Sacred Valley, and people don't always take the time. You may hike up to a local community or a remote mountain lake. See, there's always ruins. Wherever you hike, there's going to be some ruin that'll have some unique history connected to the Incas. And then but it does take generally a full day to explore. So spending the time to do that, or even doing a simpler, like the kilometer 104 hike, that you can jump off the train and hike and arrive to Machu Picchu on foot. That's again something that not a lot of people consider doing. Or just going to one of the cities like Arequipa, using that as a jumping point to Colca Canyon. A lot of people don't take that extra time just to see a different area of Peru. And Colca Canyon is the second deepest canyon in the world. It's gorgeous. It's the best place to see condors, floating on the thermals. There's natural hot springs, and again, small little local communities. So there's always something a way to spend a little bit more time and immerse yourself in one of these areas, and do something a little extra special. And in the Amazon, for instance, like there's many different Amazon experiences. I love taking a little bit more time and getting out to the Tambopata Research Center. They've recently refurbished it. It used to be quite rustic, and now they have Wi-Fi and hot water on demand. And because you can get there in one day, it's best if you take 2 days to get there. But this is in the heart of the Amazon, your best place to see jaguar and tapirs and the largest parrot clay-lick, and macaws. So it's just, it depends what you want to see. But if you really want to see the best wildlife, then you really need to take the time to go a little bit deeper into the Amazon experience.
Yeah, I think so many people, when thinking about their trip to Peru, oftentimes kind of tend to have a focus on the main sites of Machu Picchu, Sacred Valley, and Cusco, and how that can work in the most limited amount of time. And I think you've just given so much inspiration as to why, it really challenges travelers to think about how much more there is to do there, and just focusing some more time on even the well-known places, but also getting out to some of those more off the beaten track destinations as well.
Right.
Yeah, it's sometimes just taking 3 or 4 nights to go to the northern beach areas that people don't spend time. I mean, these are kind of like barefoot boutique style properties or an exclusive use villa. And maybe you just walk into the local market and you order a fruit juice or something, and you have that contact with local people that really only otherwise backpackers or local travelers are experiencing. So it gives a much more personal experience and in-depth just feeling of taking something more rich from the experience.
Right. Well, tell us a little bit about what the flights look like right now. I know that some of the airlines have cut back on their schedules. So speak a little bit about just the flight routes that are available, starting now, back again, and then what they normally are too.
We're seeing, so Peru is now officially open. They opened, and so we are seeing every day new flights starting again. There's very easy access from the US with a lot of direct flights. Houston, United's flying from Houston, American from Miami, Delta generally will fly from Atlanta, JetBlue from Fort Lauderdale, LAN has flights direct from LA, and eventually there's even actually, I just heard about a new airlines flying from JFK, Newark, and even Chicago. So there's many, and then there's connecting flights to Copa through Panama. So there are plenty of easy ways to get to Peru, and it's only a 5.5, 6 hour flight from Houston. There's no time zone change, so you don't have to deal with jet lag. It's really quite easy and sometimes very straightforward.
Yeah, and I saw that while not all flights are back on schedule just yet, there are at least daily flights from the US from about 3 different airports. So if we have any listeners that are looking to do like a last minute, festive season trip or early next year, it's very easy to get to, even as we wait for some more schedules to come on board for those flights.
And once you get to Peru, Peru is connected internally, domestically very well. So there's easy short flights. Cusco's an hour from Lima, Arequipa's an hour from Cusco. So it's just easy to get around. There's also possibilities for charter flights within Peru and in even some private helicopter transfers. So there are lots of options, and then different trains, but there's lots of options once you arrive there too.
Right. Great. That's good to hear. It is really encouraging. I think in the travel business, we've just, with the pandemic and everything, it is kind of like Christmas for us every day, because we're hearing new flight routes, new places open, and it's just getting us excited and just for what's ahead, and that regular travel will resume again. So it is exciting to hear about flight routes opening up and how easy it is to travel to, within Peru. Okay, so speak to us a little bit about their climate and the best time of year to travel there, as well as tell us what your favorite time of year to be there is.
Is that the great thing about Peru is that it can be a year-round destination, and it really again goes back to what you want to see and do as to where I might steer you as to a better season, because Peru's in the southern hemisphere but relatively close to the equator. You'll see the seasonal patterns are more based on the elevation than it is a particular month. I do think for the coast, especially Lima, is much prettier in their summer. So November through February, March is sunny, blue skies, warmer temperatures. So it lends itself a little bit better for that kind of experience. In the highlands, if you're wanting to hike, really the only months to avoid are January, February. They do close parts of the Inca Trail to help it recover, since it is so overused, and wetter, muddier conditions lend more to more erosion. But you can see, but it's cold. In the more popular time to go is June through August, but nights are cold. It will get below freezing because you are, in Cusco, you're at 11,000 feet. Machu Picchu is a cloud forest, so you're down at 7,000 feet. So it's actually lower in elevation than people think. And then in the Amazon, you have, it's a tropical rainforest. So you have chances of rain year round, and they just have a high water and low water season. So if you're wanting to explore more by boat, it's better to go the high water season. But so there's lots of things to consider. I personally really love the month of May, because the rains have sort of stopped in the highlands. So everything's very green and lush. The Sacred Valley is very green and lush. You'll see things growing and flowering. There's a lot, 3,000 orchid species in Peru, and you'll see these around Machu Picchu. And especially if you go hiking, you'll see all these beautiful orchid varieties. So that's why I like May. I think it's a great time just before the high season starts, and it's just really beautiful.
Mm-hmm. What are the current entry and exit requirements to get into Peru? I know every country right now has a different system in place for their COVID protocol. So speak to us a little bit about what Peru is doing and what we can expect when, maybe when you leave the airport in the United States and you arrive into Peru, and then upon exit too, if you have any information about that.
Yeah, so right now, just a negative PCR test that's within 72 hours of travel, and you have to fill out a health declaration online. It does authorize them to use a tracking. You have to put your cell phone number, and they will use an app to track any movements should they need to contact you. But then, but otherwise, it's all the hotels have to comply with rather strict protocol for sanitizing and safety, and masks are required pretty much everywhere. So people should expect to wear them anytime you're inside or outside around people. There is the great thing about Peru is so much of what we recommend outside of the big cities really is getting into nature and getting away from people. So you can have those moments of just space and rejuvenation, I think. There are, and they're announcing new protocols every day. For instance, Machu Picchu right now, it's free entry, but they are limiting the number of people, and you can only get, they're giving different shifts, and you can only visit the ruins for 2.5 hours. And they're also not allowing children at the moment till December. This is supposed to change on January 1st. I mean, it's mostly just because they're trying to get people to get out there. The trains and buses are operating at 50% capacity. And, there's other protocols on entries to museums and stuff, but restaurants are starting to open, hotels are opening, some of them are on delayed schedules of when they open, but all of that is just part of the conversation when we plan a trip. Some of these the restrictions are going to roll out slowly through 2021. So we are expecting fewer trains to Machu Picchu, and that's something we will have to pay attention to as we plan a trip.
Yeah, and I think one of the positives that is coming out of those restrictions, I think is Machu Picchu's operating like 30% capacity, and for a place that's, pretty much booked year round, I just can't imagine how incredible it would be to see that site with so few other visitors there. It's just a really incredible opportunity to see some very heavily trafficked sites with a lot fewer people around, which must be amazing.
Yeah. And before we move on, there has been a little bit of civil unrest in the area. I feel like that has even changed since I spoke to you last, Trista. Speak a little bit about that and just overall the safety of Peru in general. We, have also found that just being a global citizen of the world, things like this pop up all the time. So civil unrest happens everywhere in the world. And sometimes we have to change plans for a traveler who may be leaving the next day. So speak a little bit about what Ker Downey does to ensure the safety of our travelers if something like that were to pop up as well.
Yeah, so I think South America in general tends to get a bad rap in terms of the safety. And this is me speaking from, having traveled there for the past 20 years and often on my own. They also have a healthy history of protests. So there was, their president, there was some talk of corruption, or he took a bribe. So he stepped down, and the legislature appointed someone that the people didn't like. And so they took to the streets and protested. It was primarily peaceful, but there was some more serious ramifications. And I do believe there were a couple of deaths, but generally these protests are focused in the downtown around government buildings, very much the center of Lima that we wouldn't normally spend a lot of time in anyway. And now they have actually the second person stepped down, and there's a new interim president, and everyone seems happy with him, and they will have elections in April. So it's really just an expression of their democracy at work in Peru. We're part of the advantage of everything we do is custom private. So you have a private vehicle and guide and driver when you're in Lima. So if there's a reason to avoid an area or rearrange things, that's very easy for us to do. You'll have a concierge on the ground that's in contact with you, so that if something needs to change last minute, or they're aware of things in advance, if we have to get you to the airport a little bit earlier or change the touring for a day, that's super easy to do. And it's what we're really used to doing, and it's, again, thanks to, we're just in constant contact so that can stay on top of that.
Yeah, and I think you gave some advice earlier too about, just taking the time to spend a longer amount of time in a single destination. and all the benefits to that. And, you know, with both changing regulations around the world and then, you know, civil unrest and other things that can pop up. I mean, travel, as we know, can always have unexpected things occur. And one nice thing about being in a place a little bit longer is that if those changes do have to take place, if we have to make modifications, it can usually be done without really sacrificing any of, you know, your highlights or any of the primary parts of the itinerary that you wouldn't want to miss. So that definitely helps.
Yeah, it really, you know, as I listen to you speak, Trista, because I know I don't know any, I mean, other than just learning on my own and being in the travel business, I really don't know much about Peru because I haven't traveled there before. Now I want to go there after even speaking to you for just such a short amount of time, but it really does make me say, like, man, I really would use a travel planner where maybe I wouldn't normally use one otherwise, because they're just, now we have the added, you know, stress of COVID, which before we didn't have, and there's still just so many things that add to the experience of going to Peru that you wouldn't know otherwise unless you had a travel planner. So these times just make me really realize how important it is to know somebody that really has been there and knows everything about it and can make changes.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that, you know, travel, if people feel comfortable traveling, I definitely want to encourage that, but we also have to approach that with a sense of flexibility and understanding that regulations can change from one day to the next, or navigating these train schedules. I mean, just because they publish something and say, this is how we're rolling it out, doesn't mean that in 3 days they're going to change that. So it really does, you know, adding more time, slowing down, and just, you know, approaching everything with a flexible attitude is definitely going to be the way to move forward in travel right now.
Yeah, everything's changed, I think, and that's one thing I think that's changed in the travel world, is just slowing down, being more flexible, and really depending on the people who, you know, your travel planner who sent you there. Okay, so can you speak a little bit about what space is looking like for the end of the year festive season and into 2021?
Yeah, so I think because Peru just opened and many people had postponed travel plans, there's still availability. Certainly festive can be a popular time and is celebrated. Even local Peruvians will travel during this time. So there is certainly possibilities to travel from now till the end of the year. And next year, certainly the first part of the year is a great time to go and, again, still reap the benefits of fewer travelers. I always recommend people to travel or to plan as far in advance as possible, even up to a year if you're looking for high season. And so, and generally would avoid July and August if you can, but certainly plan now if you want to, because there is reduced train schedules. And, you know, if you're looking for one of the smaller properties without a lot of availability, we are going to see a lot of that space become a little bit more in demand. The great thing though with Peru is that we can easily rearrange the order of the itinerary, or there's a handful of wonderful properties, so we can generally find a substitution even if we can't get the specific property you're looking for. But yeah, as always, I would say that there's, you know, it's best. We also have a collection of private homes and villas that we're going to be offering next year, so that's another great thing. If you're a small family group or multi-generational, or even a group of friends traveling, a couple of couples traveling together, that may be a great thing to take advantage of so that you can have a more exclusive and controlled experience.
Yeah, and Trista, I've heard you talk about several different accommodations throughout Peru. Are there any in particular that you would say are your favorites to recommend to others?
Yeah, I have favorites in each area. And again, sometimes I have my favorites, and sometimes I would recommend, depending on someone's individual taste, what else they like, what I think is a good fit for them. In Lima, there's wonderful smaller boutique properties. I really like the Hotel B, which is a renovated Belle Epoque mansion from the 1920s. And it's really vibrant. It's got art everywhere in the hotel, but it might be a little bit noisier for some. There's also a smaller Villa Barranco, which is a quieter section. Both of those hotels are in Barranco, which has always been my favorite part of Lima. It's sort of bohemian, artistic, smaller shops and restaurants, and a fun place just to walk around. You see musicians on the streets, very trend, becoming a little bit more trendy now, but just borders Miraflores, so it's a great place to be located. In the Sacred Valley, I really love the Sol y Luna, which is individual casitas, and they have different levels of accommodation. So their top level is just a private cottage, and it has a living space and its own little jacuzzi on the porch. So you have just like this enclosed, wonderful accommodation, and their grounds are just lovely. They have gardens and these amazing views. But there's also some really smaller, funkier little properties for people that might have a smaller budget. El Albergue in Ollantaytambo they have their own distillery and coffee growing and making operation. So you can get like a little side experience with that. And then at Machu Picchu, I do like the Inca Terra Pueblo is definitely my go-to property because of the different, it's set inside this in the forest. And again, they have a nature walk with lots of orchids, and it's right beside the river. It's very quiet and peaceful. And even getting to Machu Picchu, aside from the hiking, you can do these little ecodomes, which are these individual, almost like yurts, but they're designed so that you can glamp on your way to, a hiking experience to Machu Picchu. And then there's also a private home called Casa Puyuncuy that's on the way to Salcantay Mountain, and that's a exclusive use. So you'll have your private staff. It can accommodate, a family, and you can have a cooking lesson or do the traditional sort of Peruvian barbecue where they just bury everything and cook it in the earth. So this can be a really fun, you can do hikes and horseback riding there. So it's really intimate and absolutely remote experience. In Cusco, again, there's a host of wonderful properties in Cusco, most of them really historic, but I love La Casona, which is, they don't even have a sign on the door. It's like this big wooden door you walk in, and there's 11 different rooms, and you have the center courtyard, and it's just a really fun little, also Relais and Chateau property. But there's also some other smaller properties like the Casa Cartagena, which is just a fun, again, a little bit more relaxed, but the food is amazing. The staff is super friendly, and it just has a nice family vibe there. And then there's new properties coming up all the time. In the Amazon, we've got the Delphine, which is only 4 cabins, and I love that, just small, intimate experience. But then there's also the Aquanera, which is just launching in, I think, next week, and it has 20 design suites, and that's going to be definitely a very exclusive and catered, lovely experience for the Amazon as well. And then Arequipa has the new Cerca, which is again a small renovated house that is all mostly designed with the white volcanic stones of Arequipa. Arequipa is known as the White City. So again, there's lots of history infused in a lot of these boutique properties. And so I just love getting to see them in Lake Titicaca. I do like the Titicaca property because you're on this peninsula and you see the lake and lots of different, the clouds coming in and the different weather, and it's just gorgeous. And then, as I mentioned before, the Tambopata Research Center, which is deep in the Amazon, and that's just a fun little place as well. So that's sort of a quick shout out to the favorites.
Yeah,
That's where
I've
I
always
want to
been
go.
so drawn to Lake Titicaca, the property. It just looks so beautiful. And it's funny, this is, I think, the first webinar that we've done where Sarah and I both actually haven't been to the destination. So it's so fun just to hear your expertise and all of your great recommendations.
I know. It's like every time I talk to you, Trista, I'm like, okay, now I'm like, I need to book my trip for May. That's what I'm going to go. If Trista's favorite time of year is May, I'm going to go in May. I'm going to get on that. So talk to us. You went through a variety of properties, and I know that price can vary pretty significantly. Speak to us a little bit about what pricing looks like for a fully inclusive itinerary, like we would plan.
Normally I would say, based on 2 people traveling, the budget, I would say between 700 and 1,000 per person per day. I mean, there's so much variety that in accommodations and activities that can go on either side. And certainly if you have more people, like a family of 4, you're going to go to the lower end of the range. And again, there's lots of ways to play with that depending on what kind of program you're looking for, but that's a good range.
Right. So if you had 10 to 12 days to go to Peru, I mean, I know you would probably want more than that, but just for like the average time that someone would go to take a trip like this, if you had 10 to 12 days, what would you recommend in terms of schedule? So how many days in Lima or Cusco, Sacred Valley? And then, if you had anything anywhere else to choose, what would you choose?
Yeah, so that's always the toughest question, because I would first say that, double the time that you think you need. I would definitely spend a couple of nights in Lima, mostly because flights get in late at night anyway. And then, at least having a full day to explore, whether you want to see some of the museums. There's some wonderful art museums. There's the Museum of Memory that talks about the conflicts in Peru and history, wandering around Barranco, or like I said, doing a foodie experience, or more of a history. There's still some ruins even right inside Lima. So there's a lot to do there. Then, go get you to the Sacred Valley to acclimate a little bit better to elevation. So you fly to Cusco, get right into the Sacred Valley, and at least 3 nights, but you could easily spend more. And this is just because the Sacred Valley is the whole section from the town of Ollantaytambo to Pisac and everything in between. So you have these villages with well-preserved ruins, and they've really just set the stage for what you're going to see at Machu Picchu. Learn some of the history. These are still important Incan towns. You can visit local markets. And I love the Chinchero market on Sunday because it's very authentic. From you'll see locals coming in and, they're selling llamas and guinea pig, and they're doing their shopping. So there's the fruit, and you still have some handicrafts. You've got you can hike and bike, as I mentioned, in the Sacred Valley, if that's of interest. You've got the town of Moray, where they do the salt mines, and these are salty water comes out of the earth, and this has been operational since the Incan times. And that's a refrain you hear often. It's and this has been used since Incan times, because really there's thousands and thousands of years of history and civilization in Peru, so that everything you do does have that richness. And then I do like to spend at least 1 night at Machu Picchu. And again, I love to do the 1-day hike so that your first view of the ruins is through the Sun Gate, and then spending, having pretty much a full day to both do some of the optional hiking that you can do within Machu Picchu, or just have the afternoon after the day crowds leave to just find a quiet spot to contemplate the ruins. This is, lots of people talk about the energy of Machu Picchu, and it's well known for that. And then, you head back to Cusco. I like there's some fun train experiences in Peru, and the Hiram Bingham is certainly one of those, where you get sort of a 4-course meal and some live entertainment, and head back to Cusco. And then you have, in Cusco, again, I think some usually spend at least a day to wander the cobbled streets, maybe, again, visit the San Pedro market, or see some of the cathedrals, some of the other architecture. I think you can easily spend another night here, because you see this, you'll see the actual Incan stones, as the foundation, and then the Spanish whitewashed walls, they're built right on top of that. So just seeing those, like the layers of history is just fun to explore in Cusco. There's lots of shops that you can visit. There's the San Blas area with the, which is the art. Lots of different artists are there. And then you have some other things that are close to Cusco. You've got the ruins of Tipon. You've got the town of Andahuaylilas, which has these amazing frescoes that have been pretty well preserved. So, there's lots of little things that you can do while you're there. And I would say that's the sort of the heart of any program I would recommend for a first time to Peru. And from there, it really, again, if you have, there's two different directions I'd go in. You can hop into the Amazon and do 3 or 4 nights there if it's like nature and wildlife is your focus, because it's super easy from Cusco, as I mentioned, or you go back through Lima to get to Iquitos, or you head down on a train or by plane to Lake Titicaca. There's a couple different train options now. The Belmont has a multi-night luxury sleeper train, and you can do Cusco to Puno to Arequipa. So that's a great way to link that area with Colca Canyon. Or you stay in Lake Titicaca for a few nights. And like I said, there's lots to explore there. This whole area around Lake Titicaca, you actually see the Aymara people who are also found in Bolivia. So you have this crossing of cultures that, the border is just sort of randomly placed there. And so you see people speaking different languages, because in the highlands around Cusco, that's where you get the Quechua speaking people. And so you see different weaving styles. Again, lots of different hikes that you can do, or getting out onto the Lake Titicaca to see the floating islands, or Tequila Island. And the Titicaca has a private boat, so you can do these experiences very independently with a small group of people, or away from like where the traditional crowds would visit the floating islands. They have partnerships with separate ones. And then you can, from there, you can easily get to Arequipa as well, and spend a couple of nights there, and then head into the Colca Canyon is a great place to end the trip, soak in some hot springs, and just enjoy the natural beauty. So that's I guess in a nutshell, how I would want to recommend it.
I can see how that doesn't quite fit easily in 10 to 12 days. Trista, you mentioned several options for hiking all around Peru, and I know you are an avid hiker yourself. So what would you recommend for someone who's like you, a very experienced hiker, and then also maybe someone who's more like me, who enjoys hiking, but in reality lives in Houston and only makes it to the mountains a few times a year, so is not nearly as experienced, but still enjoys, the outdoors and being active?
Yeah, I mean, there's a great range. I mean, again, the thing that people find most challenging in Peru is just the elevation. And so, I wouldn't start hiking on your first day, but in the Sacred Valley, there's a range of shorter hikes, even from the circular terraces of Maras. You can hike from there to the salt flats, and it's really more an easy hike, mostly downhill. So you could do something like that. And then, like I said, my favorite thing to do is the kilometer 104. So you take this, I mean, it's probably a 6 to 7 hour hike. People tell me I undersell the difficulty, but I think it's a very nice meander up through the valley. And then you get to the Huayna Huayna ruins, and then head up. The more difficult, challenging part is heading up to the Sun Gate. And then you see, your first view of Machu Picchu is from the Sun Gate, from up on high, and you just see them all laid out below you. And I just think it's magical. But then, and for more serious hikers, then there are multi-day trips. The standard is the Inca Trail, but that is tent camping. We would do it private guide, private staff, private porters, and you have these campsites that are designated along the way. But it is, even when they limit the numbers, it's a very crowded trail. I've had the pleasure of doing that, but many, many years ago. So there's other trails like the Salcantay area where you still will end up at Machu Picchu, but you take a lesser known, I mean, these are still Inca trails because the Incas had just hundreds and hundreds of miles of trails. That's how they, connected their kingdom. And so you hike up, you see this Salcantay, gorgeous, and then end up on the other side of Machu Picchu, really at the hydroelectric dam, and then you take a local train back to Aguas Calientes. So then you still get up to Machu Picchu by bus. But you have two options there. You can do a lodge to lodge trek. So you're in a more comfortable mountain lodge, or like I mentioned, the eco domes, which are just, more like on a platform, a little bit more rustic, but you still have a real bed and a little bit more comfortable than camping on the ground. And that can be set up for private groups or set based on the dates that you want to travel versus the lodge trek, which has set departures. The lodge trek you can also do on horseback. So there's that option too. So there's more remote areas that if people, really have a desire to be out and to get some more exclusive areas, going up to Huaraz to the Cordillera Blanca that's a trekking hotspot in Peru. So there's many, many different options. And certainly even for people who want to just get out and stretch their legs, there's great vistas and great trails to get out and explore.
Well, I take that as, you are like the avid trekker of the group and live in Colorado. So I take it as a high compliment if Peru has all those amazing trails, that it would be like the destination to go for hiking and all that. I would do the shorter trek, but but I still want to do it. Okay, so we know that in 2021 we're going to see a lot more of people not combining countries so much, especially if there's restrictions in place from country to country. We've spoken a little bit about one country destinations being on the rise in 2021, so that people can avoid that. So, but I do want to touch a little bit on Peru and maybe other countries that people might combine with Peru. We haven't mentioned this on this webinar about Galapagos, but I know we get a lot of people that try to combine Galapagos and Peru. So speak a little bit about that, and then maybe some other countries that are good to combine with Peru.
Yeah, I definitely recommend, even before COVID, I recommend taking the time to visit one country. I think Peru easily, you can spend 2+ weeks there versus trying to just see a couple of highlights in Peru and dash off to the Galapagos. But many people do try to combine. I mean, the other thing to think about is that distances are great, and oftentimes there aren't a ton of flight connectivity between countries in South America. There's just fewer options. So it does, flight delays or cancellations can put other parts of your trip in jeopardy. A lot of people do combine. There's only one flight route a day that connects Peru with Ecuador, but then you can, if you have, I would say a week or more, to add Ecuador and Galapagos. An easier combination is overland from Lake Titicaca to Bolivia. You can also fly from Cusco to La Paz, but you can go by train and to Lake Titicaca and then overland, because it is right there. The Bolivian side of Lake Titicaca, the little town of Copacabana, is actually lovely and gives you access to Island of the Sun and Island of the Moon. It's gorgeous. You can also visit the Tiwanaku ruins, which is another impressive structure, and then end up in La Paz, which is a funky city and one of my favorite capital cities in South America. So from there you can go down to Uyuni to do the salt flats there, or head home. So that's a combination. There are ways to even get to northern Chile, or Colombia has direct flights from Lima. So there are many things you could combine, but again, for me, I'd rather spend more time in one place. If you do have a month for travel, then absolutely, like doing a couple weeks in 2 different countries would absolutely work as well.
Or if you work from home and your kids are home, or maybe you have more time to do that kind of trip, that's another option too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So this has been so great for me to learn more about Peru. I honestly, I didn't have Peru on my bucket list before this, just because I didn't know much about it, but I'm telling you, it has moved to the top of my list because it just sounds so intriguing, just with the cultures and hiking and all the things. So I really appreciate your knowledge and expertise. Is there anything that I didn't cover that you feel like I maybe missed or that you would like to add?
Sure. Yeah. The one thing, like, again, back to the conversation about just taking a little bit more time, for instance, another thing people really love to see in Peru are the Nazca lines, but not great connectivity. So, you do need a couple nights to go down to Paracas and spend a couple nights there. And then you can fly from there to do the overflight in Nazca, visit one of the Pisco distilleries along the way. But you do have to drive down 4 or 5 hours from Lima and then drive back up. So you do have to build in some extra overnights just to get around.
It's fascinating. Okay, so tell everybody if they want to reach you, what's the best way to do so, and yeah, how they can contact you if they're interested in Peru or anywhere else in South America. Trista also knows a lot about the rest of the world too, but South America she's just so skilled at it. So tell us how people can reach you.
Yes, so our 1-800 number, 1-800-423-4236. You can just ask for me, or you can email me at tgage, which is my first initial last name, at kerdowney.com. Super easy.
Great. Yeah, and if you're working with another designer, you'll feel free to reach out to them too. But yeah, it's super easy. So we'd love to hear from you if you're interested in Peru or South America at all. We would like to thank Peru, the Peru Tourism Board, for their partnership in presenting this webinar today. We really appreciate that. If you are missing regular travel like we are, please jump on social, interact with us there. We're always on there, and share all of your favorite travel memories. I had mentioned this earlier, but it's exciting to see the world sort of opening up. So join us there. Next month, we will have a break, but not really. We're doing a little bit of a different format next month. Tiffany is actually traveling to Rwanda at the first part of December. So our next on the horizon webinar will be a chat with her and all the things that she's done to prepare for this trip, all the mental challenges she's had to get through, the COVID, sort of how testing has worked. And so we'll be talking about that and sharing that on here. And then in January, we'll come back with a live presentation series of Rwanda and her trip there. So we can't wait for that. Trista, I thank you for joining us today. You just are a wealth of knowledge, and it's been fascinating hearing from you. So thank you for taking the time to meet with us today. We appreciate you joining us. Join us next time. Bye.